Her fingers trembled as she clutched the invitation, its pastel blue edges mocking her empty arms. Could she face his smug smile, knowing he'd invited her to twist the knife, only to arrive with a secret that would shatter his world? Hey my beautiful family, welcome back to today's story. I truly appreciate every single one of you for being here today. This story is going to be an emotional and powerful one, so make sure you stay with me all the way till the end. You don't want to miss a single moment. The late afternoon sun spilled through the cafe window, casting a golden haze over Lila's untouched latte. She sat alone at a corner table, her hazel eyes fixed on the invitation in her hands. The paper was soft, almost delicate, with embossed balloons and tiny storks dancing across the top. "You're invited to celebrate new beginnings," it proclaimed in curling script. Below in bold, "Nathan and Amelia's baby shower." Lila's throat tightened. Nathan, her ex-husband of 3 years, had sent this. Not out of kindness, she knew. The man who'd once sworn to love her forever had scrawled a note in his sharp, careless handwriting. "Thought you'd want to see what you missed out on." Her fingers curled, crumpling the edge. The cafe's hum, clinking mugs, soft jazz, the barista's laughter, faded as memories surged. Nathan's cold voice during their divorce, blaming her for their childless marriage. "You're broken, Lila," he'd said, his words slicing deeper than any knife. She'd spent years rebuilding herself, piecing together a life from the shards of his betrayal. Now this. An invitation to his baby shower, a public stage for his new life with Amelia, the woman he'd left her for. Lila's chest ached, not from longing for him, but from the old wound of being deemed less than. She set the invitation down, her hands steadying. She wasn't that woman anymore. Across town, Nathan leaned back in a cushioned chair at his pristine suburban home, a glass of bourbon in hand. The living room was a sea of pastel decorations, blue and pink streamers, a banner reading "Welcome, little one." Amelia, his fiancée, bustled in the kitchen, her laughter bright as she arranged cupcakes with tiny fondant booties. Nathan's lips curved into a satisfied smirk. Inviting Lila had been his idea, a petty jab he couldn't resist. He pictured her face, pale, pinched, maybe tear-streaked, when she saw him and Amelia glowing with impending parenthood. He'd moved on, built a perfect life, while Lila, he assumed, was still alone, childless, stuck in the past. The thought warmed him more than the bourbon. He stood, adjusting his tie in the mirror. His reflection showed a man in his prime, mid-30s, sharp jawline, eyes glinting with confidence. Amelia's pregnancy had cemented his vision of himself, the successful architect, the family man. Lila's failure to give him that had been her undoing, or so he told himself. He hadn't seen her since the divorce, hadn't cared to. But the idea of her witnessing his triumph? That was worth the price of an invitation. He chuckled, imagining her awkward congratulations, her forced smile. "She'll come," he muttered to himself. "She won't be able to stay away." Back at the cafe, Lila's phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. A text from her sister Clara. "You're not actually going, are you?" Lila's lips twitched, a spark of defiance igniting. Clara knew the pain Nathan had caused, the years Lila had spent blaming herself for their empty nursery. But Clara didn't know everything. Lila's fingers hovered over the keyboard, then typed, "I'm going. And I'm not going alone." She set the phone down, her gaze drifting to the street outside, where a minivan was parked. Inside, 4 car seats held her world. Her quadruplets, born 6 months ago after years of silent struggles and a miracle she hadn't dared hope for. The cafe door chimed and a woman entered, pushing a stroller. Lila's heart clenched, not with envy but with a fierce, protective love. Her babies, Eli, Nora, Theo and Ivy, were her victory, her redemption. She'd fought through infertility treatments, heartbreak and doubt to bring them into the world. Nathan didn't know. No one from her old life did. She'd kept her pregnancy private, shielding her fragile joy from judgment. But now, with his cruel invitation, Nathan had opened a door. Lila wasn't the broken woman he'd left behind. She was a mother, whole and unyielding. And she would walk into that baby shower with her head high, her children in tow. She stood, smoothing her dress, a simple navy shift that hid the exhaustion of sleepless nights and endless diaper changes. Her reflection in the cafe window showed a woman transformed, not just by motherhood, but by the quiet strength she'd forged in solitude. Nathan thought he'd humiliate her. Instead, she'd rewrite the narrative. She grabbed her purse, the invitation tucked inside, and stepped outside to the minivan. The babies cooed softly, unaware of the storm their presence would unleash. Lila's heart raced, but her resolve was iron. This wasn't just about facing Nathan. It was about claiming her truth. Nathan, meanwhile, sipped his bourbon, oblivious to the shift in the air. He glanced at Amelia, who was humming as she folded napkins. "Lila Arseed," he called out, his tone light but edged with malice. Amelia paused, her brow furrowing. "Why did you invite her, Nate? That's cruel." He shrugged, dismissing her concern. "She needs to see I'm happy. Closure, you know." Amelia's lips pressed into a thin line, but she said nothing, turning back to her cupcakes. Nathan didn't notice the flicker of unease in her eyes. He was too busy imagining Lila's defeat. Outside the cafe, Lila buckled the last car seat, her fingers brushing Nora's tiny hand. The baby's grip was strong, grounding her. She closed the van door, her breath steadying. The baby shower was tomorrow. She'd spent years running from the pain Nathan caused, but no more. She wasn't just bringing her children, she was bringing her heart whole and unbroken, to a place that once shattered it. The thought sent a shiver through her, equal parts fear and fire. She'd face him not for revenge but for herself. Have you ever faced a moment where you had to confront someone who underestimated you? Share in the comments how you found the strength to stand tall. The suburban street was alive with spring, blooming azaleas, children's laughter from a nearby park, the faint hum of a lawnmower. Lila stood beside her minivan, the weight of the invitation now replaced by the weight of her decision. The baby shower was in full swing at Nathan and Amelia's house, its white picket fence adorned with blue and pink balloons bobbing in the breeze. She smoothed her navy dress, her heart hammering as she unbuckled the Quadruplets car seats. Eli's tiny fist waved, Nora gurgled, Theo blinked sleepily, and Ivy's soft coo steadied Lila's nerves. Each sound was a reminder. She wasn't here to lose herself again. She was here to stand in her truth. Inside, the house buzzed with chatter. Guests milled about, sipping punch and admiring the gift table stacked with diapers and plush toys. Nathan stood near the fireplace, his arm around Amelia, who glowed in a flowing white dress, her hand resting on her swollen belly. His smile was wide, performative as he accepted congratulations. "First of many," he said to a coworker, his voice carrying a practiced charm. But his eyes kept darting to the door, anticipation curling in his chest. Lila would show, he was sure. And when she did, he'd savor her discomfort, the way her face would fall seeing his perfect life. Lila approached the front steps, pushing a double stroller with Eli and Nora while carrying Theo and Ivy in a dual carrier strapped to her chest. The stroller's wheels crunched against the gravel path, a sound that felt louder than it should. Her breath hitched as she rang the doorbell, the chime cutting through the party's hum. A moment later, Amelia opened the door, her smile polite but curious. "Lila," she said, her voice soft, eyes widening at the sight of the stroller and carriers. I didn't expect. Come in, please." Lila stepped inside, the air thick with the scent of vanilla candles and fresh flowers. The room fell silent, heads turning as guests noticed her, and the babies. Nathan's laughter stopped mid-sentence, his glass frozen halfway to his lips. His eyes locked on Lila, then dropped to the stroller, the carriers, the four tiny faces. His jaw slackened, the bourbon trembling in his hand. Lila didn't flinch. She met his gaze, her chin lifted, her hazel eyes steady. "Congratulations, Nathan," she said, her voice clear, cutting through the stillness. "I brought some friends to celebrate." The room erupted in whispers. "Quadruplets," a woman gasped. "Whose are they?" another muttered. Amelia's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes darting between Lila and the babies. Nathan's face flushed, a mix of shock and something darker, anger maybe or shame. He stepped forward, his voice low but sharp. "Lila, what is this?" "You didn't." He stopped, his words catching as Theo let out a soft whimper, drawing every eye. "They're mine," Lila said, her tone calm but unyielding. She adjusted Ivy's carrier, her fingers brushing the baby's cheek. "Eli, Nora, Theo and Ivy. 6 months old." He paused, letting the words land. "I got your invitation. Thought I'd share my new beginnings too." The subtext was a blade, sharp and precise. Nathan's smirk was gone, replaced by a flicker of something raw, disbelief, maybe even regret. He'd invited her to mock her barrenness, to rub his happiness in her face. Instead, she'd walked in with a miracle he couldn't comprehend. Amelia recovered first, her voice trembling but kind. "They're beautiful, Lila." "How? I mean when?" Her question hung in the air, genuine but laced with awkwardness. Lila smiled, a small, private curve of her lips. "It's a long story," she said, her eyes never leaving Nathan's. "But let's just say life surprises you when you least expect it." The room buzzed again, guests leaning closer, sensing the weight of the moment. Lila's heart pounded, but she felt a strange calm, like standing in the eye of a storm. Nathan set his glass down, the clink loud in the quiet. "You never said anything," he said, his voice tight, almost accusatory. 3 years, Lila. Not a word." His words carried a sting, as if her silence was a betrayal. Lila's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice steady. "You didn't ask, Nathan. You assumed." The air between them crackled, years of unspoken pain surfacing. She remembered his cold dismissal, his blame, the way he'd walked away without looking back. Now he was the one off balance. A guest, an older woman with a pearl necklace, broke the tension. "Oh, they're darling. Quadruplets? You must be exhausted." The crowd laughed, easing the atmosphere, but Nathan's eyes stayed on Lila. She could see the questions burning in him. How, when, who? But she owed him nothing. She turned to Amelia, softening. "Congratulations again. It's a lovely party." Amelia nodded, her smile faltering as she glanced at Nathan, sensing the shift in him. Lila moved to the gift table, setting down a small, wrapped box. A simple onesie bought more out of courtesy than sentiment. The babies stirred, Nora's tiny hand grabbing at Lila's necklace. She adjusted the stroller, aware of every eye on her. The moment was seismic, not just for Nathan but for her. She'd walked into his world, expecting to face his cruelty, and instead she'd rewritten the script. Her children weren't just her joy, they were her shield, her proof that she was more than his judgment. Nathan followed her, his voice low so only she could hear. "You could have told me, Lila. After everything, you didn't think I deserved to know?" His tone was a mix of hurt and indignation, but Lila saw through it. He wasn't wounded by her secrecy, he was wounded by her triumph. She turned, her eyes locking with his. "You invited me here to hurt me, Nathan. Don't pretend you cared about my life." Her words were soft, but they landed like a blow. He stepped back, his face paling. Amelia approached, her hand on Nathan's arm, her voice tentative. Let's open some gifts, okay?" She was trying to salvage the party, but her eyes lingered on Lila, a mix of admiration and unease. Lila nodded, stepping back, her babies anchoring her. The room resumed its chatter, but the air had changed. Nathan's perfect day was unraveling, and Lila stood at the center, unshaken. As guests cooed over the quadruplets, Lila felt a warmth spread through her. This wasn't revenge, though it could have been. It was reclamation. She'd spent years believing she was less, but these 4 tiny lives had rewritten her story. Nathan's invitation had been a taunt, but her arrival was a declaration. She was whole and she was enough. Have you ever turned a painful moment into a chance to prove your strength? Share in the comments how you reclaimed your power. The baby shower's festive hum resumed, but it was a fragile veneer over the tension that lingered like smoke. Lila stood near the gift table, her hands resting on the stroller where Eli and Nora dozed, their tiny chests rising in rhythm. Theo fussed softly in the carrier and she rocked gently, her movements automatic, soothing. The room smelled of sugary frosting and lavender, but the sweetness felt cloying, pressing against her skin. Guests cast curious glances, their smiles polite but their whispers sharp. Quadruplets? How? Lila kept her expression neutral, her hazel eyes scanning the crowd, avoiding Nathan's gaze. She'd delivered her bombshell, but now doubt crept in, cold and familiar. Had she been reckless walking into his world like this? Nathan stood across the room, his arms still around Amelia, but his posture was rigid, his smile a mask. The bourbon in his glass was gone, replaced by a tightness in his chest he couldn't name. Lila's arrival with 4 babies, her babies, had shattered his script. He'd invited her to gloat, to prove he'd won, but now he felt exposed, as if she'd peeled back his carefully curated life to reveal something hollow. "She's just showing off," he muttered to himself, his voice low enough that Amelia didn't hear. He wanted to believe it, needed to. Lila couldn't have moved on so completely, Not after he'd defined her as broken. Lila felt the weight of his stare, a prickle on her neck. She busied herself adjusting Ivy's blanket, her fingers trembling slightly. The triumph of her entrance was fading, replaced by the old ache Nathan's presence always stirred. She'd spent years burying his words, "You're broken, Lila." But here in his perfect house with its perfect decorations they echoed. She'd come to prove him wrong, but what if this only deepened his scorn? What if he saw her children as a desperate bid for attention? She shook her head, trying to silence the thought. "You're enough," she whispered to herself, the words barely audible over the party's chatter. A guest approached, a woman with a bright smile and a glass of punch. "Lila, right? Your babies are gorgeous. How do you manage?" Her tone was kind, but Lila sensed the curiosity beneath, the hunger for details. "We get by," Lila said, her smile tight. "Lots of coffee and love." The woman laughed, but Lila's chest tightened. She didn't want to be a spectacle, didn't want her children reduced to a story for strangers. She glanced at the door, tempted to leave, to retreat to the safety of her minivan, her quiet life. But running now would feel like letting Nathan win again. Nathan, meanwhile, was unraveling. He excused himself from Amelia's side, slipping into the kitchen where the fluorescent light felt too bright, exposing the cracks in his composure. He gripped the counter, the marble cold under his palms. Lila's words, "you assumed," burned in his mind. He'd assumed she was stuck, alone, childless. Instead she'd walked in with a family, a life he hadn't imagined her capable of. It wasn't just shock. It was betrayal, as if she'd rewritten their history without his permission. "She should have told me," he said to the empty room, his voice sharp. He needed her to be the failure he'd left behind, not this woman who'd outdone him. Amelia followed him, her footsteps soft on the hardwood. "Nate, you okay?" she asked, her voice gentle but wary. She'd seen the shift in him, the way his eyes darkened when Lila spoke. Nathan forced a smile, loosening his grip on the counter. "Yeah, just surprised. Didn't think she'd show up, let alone with kids." Amelia frowned, her hand resting on her belly. "You invited her to hurt her, didn't you?" Her words were soft, but they cut. Nathan's jaw tightened. "It's not like that. I just thought, closure." Amelia shook her head, her eyes searching his. "Closure for who, Nate?" She turned away, leaving him alone with the echo of her question. Back in the living room, Lila caught Amelia's glance, a fleeting moment of understanding. Amelia wasn't her enemy, but she was part of Nathan's world, a world Lila had been erased from. She felt a pang of guilt for disrupting Amelia's day, but it was fleeting. Nathan had set the stage, not her. Still, the weight of the room, the eyes, the whispers, pressed harder. She wanted to leave, to protect her babies from this scrutiny, but something held her here. Maybe it was pride, or maybe it was the need to prove, not to Nathan but to herself, that she could face this. A man approached, Nathan's old friend from college, his grin too wide. "Lila, quadruplets? That's wild. Who's the dad?" The question was casual, but it landed like a stone. Lila's smile froze, her heart lurching. She'd known this would come, the inevitable probing into her private world. "Just me and them," she said, her voice steady but clipped. The man raised an eyebrow, but she turned away, focusing on Theo's tiny hand gripping her finger. She didn't owe anyone her story, least of all Nathan's friends. But the question stirred a deeper fear, that her life, her family, would be seen as incomplete without a partner. Nathan re-entered the room, his composure regained but brittle. He avoided Lila, busying himself with guests, laughing too loudly at a joke about diaper duty. But his eyes kept drifting to her, to the babies, to the life she'd built without him. He wanted to dismiss it, to call it a fluke, a stunt. But the sight of her, calm, centered, a mother, gnawed at him. He'd defined himself by her failure, and now that foundation was crumbling. "She doesn't get to do this," he muttered under his breath, pouring another drink. He needed to regain control to make sense of this. Lila felt the shift in the air, the way Nathan's presence seemed to loom even from across the room. She wanted to confront him, to demand why he'd invited her, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she knelt by the stroller, brushing a curl from Nora's forehead. "We're okay," she whispered, more to herself than the baby. She stood, catching her reflection in a nearby mirror, tired eyes, but a fire in them she hadn't seen in years. She could leave, but she wouldn't. Not yet. This moment was hers to claim even if it hurt. Nathan watched her from the corner of his eye, his grip tightening on his glass. He wanted to talk to her, to demand answers, but pride held him back. She'd blindsided him and he hated her for it. But beneath the anger was something else. Guilt, maybe, or the faintest flicker of respect. He pushed it down, focusing on Amelia, on the life he'd built. Lila was the past. He had to be. Have you ever resisted facing a truth about yourself or someone else because it was too painful? Share in the comments how you dealt with that moment of denial. The baby shower's festive glow dimmed as a sudden wail pierced the air, not from Lila's quadruplets but from the sky outside. Thunder rumbled and rain began to lash the windows of Nathan and Amelia's pristine home, the droplets drumming against the glass like an impatient guest. Guests glanced nervously at the darkening sky, their chatter faltering. Lila stood near the gift table, her hands steadying the stroller where Eli and Nora slept, oblivious to the storm. Theo stirred in the carrier, his tiny fingers brushing her collarbone, while Ivy's soft breaths warmed her chest. The scent of rain mingled with the lingering sweetness of cupcakes, grounding Lila in the moment. She wanted to leave, to escape the weight of Nathan's gaze and the crowd's curiosity, but the storm had other plans. Amelia clapped her hands, her voice bright but strained. Looks like we're all staying put for a bit. Let's move to the living room for games. Her smile was a valiant attempt to keep the party alive, but her eyes flickered to Lila, then Nathan, sensing the undercurrent. The guests shuffled toward the couches, clutching their punch glasses, but the mood had shifted. Lila hesitated, her instincts screaming to bundle her babies and go, but the rain was a deluge now, the street outside a blur of water. She couldn't risk driving with the quadruplets in this. She was stuck. Nathan stood near the fireplace, his jaw tight, his fingers tapping against an empty glass. He'd avoided Lila since her cutting words, "You assumed," but the storm trapped them under the same roof, and the air between them crackled with unfinished business. He watched her from the corner of his eye, her calm movements as she soothed Theo, the way she seemed to belong in a way he hadn't expected. His plan to humiliate her had backfired, and now he couldn't escape her presence, or the questions it raised. He told himself he didn't care, that she was irrelevant, but his pulse betrayed him, quickening every time she moved. Amelia approached Lila, her expression tentative but warm. "You can't drive in this, Lila. Stay until it clears. We've got plenty of space." Her voice held genuine kindness, but Lila caught the flicker of unease in her eyes, as if Amelia sensed the storm wasn't just outside. Lila nodded, her throat tight. "Thank you," she said softly, adjusting Ivy's carrier. She didn't want to stay, didn't want to be in Nathan's orbit any longer, but she had no choice. The baby's safety came first. As guests settled into the living room, Nathan's friend Tom, the one who'd asked about the baby's father, called out, "Hey Lila, bring those cuties over here. Let's get a closer look." His tone was jovial, but it grated on Lila, another reminder of the scrutiny she'd hoped to avoid. She pushed the stroller forward, her movements deliberate, and parked it near a plush armchair. The guests cooed, their voices a mix of awe and curiosity, but Lila felt exposed, like a performer under a spotlight. She sat, her hands resting on the stroller, anchoring herself to her children. Nathan couldn't stay away. He drifted closer, drawn by some force he refused to name. He crouched near the stroller, his eyes on Eli, whose tiny hand clutched a blanket. "They're small," he said, his voice low, almost reluctant. Lila's gaze flicked to him, sharp but guarded. "They're perfect," she replied, her tone firm, a wall between them. Nathan nodded, his lips pressing into a thin line. "Didn't say they weren't." The words were neutral, but the subtext was heavy. Years of blame, of assumptions, hung between them like the storm clouds outside. Amelia, sensing the tension, intervened. "Let's play a game. Guess the baby's name." She handed out slips of paper, her cheerfulness a lifeline for the faltering party. Guests scribbled guesses, their laughter filling the room, but Lila and Nathan were in their own world. He stood, his hand brushing the stroller as he did, and Lila flinched, a reflex she couldn't hide. "You don't get to do that," she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the rain. Nathan's brow furrowed. "Do what?" he asked, but his tone was defensive, as if he knew exactly what she meant. "You don't get to act like you care," Lila said, her eyes locking with his. The words were soft, but they carried the weight of their history. Nathan's face hardened, but before he could respond, Amelia called him over to help with the game. He hesitated, then walked away, leaving Lila with a knot in her chest. She wanted to hate him, to dismiss him as she'd planned, but his brief moment with Eli had stirred something. Not love, but a flicker of the life they'd once dreamed of. She pushed it down, focusing on Nora's soft snores. The game continued, but the storm worsened, thunder shaking the windows. A guest's phone buzzed with a weather alert. Flash flood warning, roads closed. Groans rippled through the room, but Lila's heart sank. She was trapped here in Nathan's perfect house, with her past staring her down. Amelia approached again, this time with a blanket. "For the babies," she said, her smile genuine. "It's getting chilly." Lila took it, her fingers brushing Amelia's, and for a moment she saw not an enemy but a woman caught in Nathan's orbit, just as she once was. "Thank you," Lila said, her voice softer now. Amelia hesitated, then sat beside her. "I didn't know he invited you like that," she said quietly, her eyes on the floor. "I'm sorry." Lila's breath caught. Amelia's apology was unexpected, a crack in the facade of the day. "It's not your fault," Lila said, her voice steady but kind. "He's always been good at rewriting the story." Amelia's lips twitched, a sad smile. "Yeah. He is." The moment was brief, but it shifted something in Lila. A recognition that Amelia wasn't her rival, but another woman navigating Nathan's shadow. Nathan watched them from across the room, his stomach twisting. He wanted to interrupt, to reclaim control, but he stayed rooted, his mind racing. Lila's presence, her children, her calm strength. It was unraveling him. He'd built his life on the idea that he'd escaped her, that he'd won. But now, trapped by the storm, he couldn't escape the truth. Lila had moved on and he hadn't. Not really. He turned away, busying himself with the game, but his hands shook as he handed out pens. Lila felt the shift too, the way the storm had forced them into this uneasy orbit. She didn't want to be here, didn't want to feel the pull of old wounds, but her babies grounded her. She looked at Theo, his eyes blinking up at her, and felt a surge of love so fierce it drowned out the doubt. She wasn't here for Nathan. She was here for herself, for the life she'd built. But as the rain pounded and the party dragged on, she knew this forced proximity was only the beginning. Something deeper was stirring and she wasn't sure she was ready to face it. Have you ever been stuck in a situation that forced you to confront someone from your past? Share in the comments how you navigated that tension. The rain battered Nathan and Amelia's home, a relentless drumbeat that sealed the guests inside like captives. The living room, once bright with baby shower cheer, now felt claustrophobic, the pastel balloons drooping under the weight of the storm's gloom. Lila sat on the plush armchair, her hands resting on the stroller where Eli and Nora slept, their tiny faces peaceful despite the chaos outside. Theo stirred in the carrier, his soft whimpers blending with the rain's roar, while Ivy's steady breaths against Lila's chest were a lifeline. The scent of damp wool and cooling coffee filled the air, grounding her as she fought the urge to flee. The storm had trapped her here, and Nathan's presence was a shadow she couldn't shake. Across the room, Nathan stood by the gift table, his fingers tracing the edge of a wrapped box, his mind elsewhere. Lila's words from earlier, "You don't get to act like you care," echoed, stirring memories he'd buried deep. He glanced at her, her calm exterior a stark contrast to the turmoil she'd unleashed in him. The quadruplets, her quiet strength, the life she'd built. It all challenged the narrative he'd clung to, that he'd left her because she was broken, that he'd won. Now, trapped by the storm, he couldn't escape the past creeping back, demanding to be faced. Amelia, sensing the tension, kept the guests occupied with another game, her voice bright but strained. "Okay, everyone, time to guess the baby's birth weight," she called, passing out slips of paper. But her eyes kept drifting to Lila, then Nathan, as if piecing together a puzzle she hadn't known existed. Lila felt the scrutiny not just from Amelia but from the other guests, their whispers now muted but no less piercing. She adjusted the blanket over Nora, her fingers brushing a small, faded bracelet on her wrist. A thin silver chain with a single charm, a gift from her mother long ago. It was a relic of a time before Nathan, before the pain, and its weight steadied her. As she tucked the blanket, a guest, a woman with kind eyes and a knitted sweater, approached. "That bracelet," she said softly, her voice cutting through the room's hum. "It's beautiful. Where'd you get it?" Lila froze, her fingers lingering on the charm. The question was innocent, but it cracked open a door she'd kept locked. "It was my mother's," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "She gave it to me before she passed." The woman nodded, her smile sympathetic, but Lila's mind was already slipping into the past, to a memory she hadn't revisited in years. Flashback. 10 years ago, Lila sat in a hospital room, the air thick with antiseptic and grief. Her mother, frail but fierce, pressed the bracelet into her hand. "You're stronger than you know, Lila," she'd whispered, her voice barely a breath. "Don't let anyone make you feel less." Lila had been 25, newly married to Nathan, full of hope for a family. But her mother's death weeks later left a void, and Nathan's promises of "we'll get through this" soon turned to blame when their dreams of children didn't materialize. The bracelet became her anchor, a reminder of her mother's faith in her, even as Nathan's faith crumbled. The memory hit Lila like a wave, her throat tightening. She looked at her babies, their tiny forms a testament to her resilience, but the pain of those years, of Nathan's cold dismissal, of her own self-doubt, surged back. She hadn't told anyone about the quadruplets, not even her sister Clara, until they were born. The bracelet had been her silent companion through countless doctor visits, failed treatments, and the miracle of their conception. Now in this room, it felt like a talisman, grounding her against Nathan's shadow. Nathan, meanwhile, was unraveling in his own way. He'd retreated to the hallway, away from the guests' chatter, his hands shoved in his pockets. The storm's roar mirrored the chaos in his mind. Lila's arrival with her children had cracked open a memory he'd tried to forget. He closed his eyes and it came rushing back. Flashback. 3 years ago, the night before their divorce was finalized. Nathan stood in their old apartment, the air heavy with silence. Lila sat on the couch, her eyes red but dry, the bracelet glinting on her wrist. "We can try again," she'd said, her voice raw. "There are options, Nathan." But he'd been done, his patience worn thin by years of failed fertility treatments, by the weight of her grief. "You can't give me what I want, Lila," he'd said, his words sharp, final. He'd walked out, leaving her alone with that bracelet, with her pain. He told himself he was right, that she was the problem. But now, seeing her with 4 children, he wondered what he'd missed. Nathan opened his eyes, the hallway's dim light casting shadows on the walls. He'd blamed Lila for their childless marriage, but her quadruplets were proof it wasn't just her. The realization stung, a quiet accusation that he'd been wrong, not just about her but about himself. He'd built his life with Amelia on the idea that he'd escaped a broken past, but now that past was here, breathing, undeniable. He wanted to confront Lila, to demand how she'd done it, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he returned to the living room, his gaze landing on her bracelet. It was the same one, a ghost from their shared history. Lila caught his look, her fingers instinctively covering the charm. "Don't," she said, her voice low, sharp. The single word carried years of hurt, a warning not to cross into her world. Nathan hesitated, then spoke, his voice quieter than he intended. "I remember that bracelet. Your mom gave it to you." Lila's eyes narrowed, her heart racing. "You don't get to remember that," she said, her voice steady but laced with pain. "You walked away from that life, Nathan. From me." The words hung between them, raw and unfiltered, drawing a few curious glances from nearby guests. Amelia approached, her steps tentative, sensing the charged air. "Everything okay?" she asked, her eyes flicking between them. Lila nodded, her gaze never leaving Nathan. "Just catching up," she said, her tone clipped. Nathan forced a smile, but his hands shook slightly. "Yeah, just old times," he said, the lie thin. Amelia's brow furrowed, but she didn't press, turning back to the guests with a forced laugh about the game. The bracelet, the memories, the unspoken truths. They tightened the knot between Lila and Nathan, binding them in this moment. Lila felt exposed, her past laid bare but also fierce. Her children were her shield, her proof that she'd survived. Nathan felt the ground shifting beneath him, his certainty eroding. The storm outside raged on, and with it the mystery of their shared history deepened, pulling them toward a reckoning neither was ready for. The storm's fury softened to a steady patter, the rain now a gentle hum against the windows of Nathan and Amelia's home. Inside, the baby shower's energy had waned, guests sprawled on couches, their laughter quieter, their punch glasses empty. The air carried the faint scent of wet earth and cooling candles, a reminder of the world outside that held them captive. Lila sat in the armchair, her hands resting lightly on the stroller where Eli and Nora dozed, their tiny lips parted in sleep. Theo, in the carrier, gripped her finger, his warmth a quiet anchor, while Ivy's soft breaths brushed her chest. The bracelet on her wrist glinted faintly, a silent tether to the past she'd just relived. Nathan stood near the fireplace, his posture less rigid now, his eyes less sharp. The weight of Lila's words, "You walked away from that life, Nathan. From me," had cracked something in him, a fissure he couldn't ignore. He'd spent years defining himself against her, but her presence, her children, her undeniable strength had upended that narrative. The storm had forced them together, and now in this fragile pause he felt the pull of something he hadn't expected. A need to understand her, to bridge the chasm he'd created. Amelia, sensing the shift in the room, suggested a break from games. "Let's just chat, share some stories," she said, her voice warm but tinged with fatigue. She settled on a couch, her hand resting on her belly, and guests began swapping tales of parenting mishaps and joys. Lila listened, her smile polite but distant, her focus on her babies. She wanted to stay invisible, to protect this moment of calm, but the room's intimacy drew her in. A guest story about a sleepless night with a newborn made her laugh softly, a sound that surprised her. It was the first time she'd let her guard down since arriving. Nathan noticed. He'd been watching her, not with the malice of earlier but with a quiet curiosity. He moved closer, hesitating before sitting on the ottoman across from her. The stroller formed a barrier between them, but it also felt like a bridge. "They're good sleepers," he said, his voice low, nodding toward Eli and Nora. Lila's eyes flicked to him, wary but softening. "Sometimes," she said, her tone cautious but not hostile. "They have their moments." The words were simple, but they carried a weight. An opening, small but real. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his gaze on Theo's tiny hand. "How do you do it?" "For at once." His question wasn't accusatory, not this time. There was a trace of awe, maybe even respect. Lila's breath caught, her instinct to deflect warring with a sudden urge to share. She looked at her babies, their faces a reminder of the miracle she'd fought for. "You just do," she said softly. "You figure it out one day at a time." Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of vulnerability, a glimpse of the exhaustion and joy intertwined. Nathan nodded, his fingers tracing the edge of the ottoman. "I didn't think," he stopped, his throat tight. "I didn't think you'd have this." The admission hung between them, raw and unpolished. Lila's jaw tightened, but she didn't look away. "Neither did I," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But life doesn't care what you think you deserve." The words weren't cruel, just honest, and they landed like a quiet truth. Nathan's eyes dropped, his shoulders sagging under the weight of her words. A guest nearby laughed, breaking the moment, but the air between them had shifted. Lila felt it, a fragile thread of connection, not love, not yet, but something human. She glanced at Amelia, who was watching them with a mix of curiosity and unease. Lila offered her a small smile, a gesture of peace. Amelia returned it, her hand tightening on her belly as if grounding herself. The room's warmth, the baby's soft breaths, the rain's gentle rhythm, it all wove a moment of safety, a pause where wounds could breathe. Nathan spoke again, his voice quieter now. "I'm sorry, Lila." The words were sudden, almost involuntary, and they stunned them both. Lila's eyes widened, her fingers tightening on Theo's hand. "For what?" she asked, her voice steady but laced with challenge. Nathan hesitated, his gaze flickering to the bracelet on her wrist, the one he'd seen in their darkest moments. "For assuming," he said finally, echoing her words. "For thinking I knew you." The admission was small, but it was a crack in his armor, a step toward vulnerability. Lila's heart raced, a mix of anger and something softer. Relief, maybe, or recognition. She wanted to lash out, to list every hurt he'd caused, but the baby's presence steadied her. "You didn't know me," she said, her voice soft but firm. "But I didn't know myself either. Not then." The words were a confession, a bridge to the woman she'd become. Nathan nodded, his eyes on the floor as if seeing her for the first time. Amelia approached, her steps hesitant, carrying a tray of cookies. "Thought you might want something sweet," she said, offering one to Lila. The gesture was simple, but it felt like an olive branch. Lila took a cookie, her fingers brushing Amelia's, and smiled. "Thanks," she said, her voice warm. "These look amazing." Amelia's shoulders relaxed, and for a moment the three of them, Lila, Nathan, Amelia, existed in a strange harmony, bound by the storm, the babies, and the weight of shared history. The guest stories continued, a soft backdrop of laughter and warmth. Lila bit into the cookie, its sweetness grounding her, and glanced at Nathan. He was watching Eli, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "He looks like you," he said almost to himself. Lila's chest tightened, not with pain but with a quiet ache, an echo of what might have been. "Maybe," she said, her voice soft, a smile flickering. The moment was fleeting, but it was real, a fragile bond forged in the storm's pause. As the rain slowed, Lila felt a shift within her. She'd come to prove herself, to face Nathan's cruelty, but this moment wasn't about triumph. It was about healing, about seeing the man who'd hurt her as human again. Nathan felt it too, a crack in his pride, a glimpse of the life he'd walked away from. The bond was fragile, but it was there, a seed of something neither could name yet. Have you ever found unexpected common ground with someone who hurt you? Share in the comments how that moment changed you. The rain had softened to a drizzle, its gentle tap against the windows a faint echo of the storm's earlier fury. Inside Nathan and Amelia's home, the baby shower clung to its last threads of festivity, the air thick with the scent of damp fabric and wilting flowers. Lila sat in the armchair, her hands steady on the stroller where Eli and Nora slept, their tiny breaths a quiet rhythm. Theo, in the carrier, gummed her finger, while Ivy's warmth against her chest anchored her. The fragile bond she'd felt with Nathan, a moment of shared vulnerability, lingered like a held breath, but the room's atmosphere had shifted, heavy with an unspoken tension. Nathan stood by the gift table, his posture stiff, his fingers twitching as if searching for something to hold. His apology to Lila, "I'm sorry for assuming," had cracked his defenses, but now he felt exposed raw. Her presence, her children, her quiet strength challenged everything he'd built his life on. He glanced at Amelia, who was laughing softly with a guest, her hand on her belly, and felt a pang of guilt. He'd invited Lila to hurt her, to prove his triumph, but instead he was unraveling, questioning his own choices. The warmth of their earlier moment felt like a betrayal. Of Amelia, of himself. Lila sensed the shift in him, the way his eyes darted away when she looked up. She wanted to hold on to the peace they'd found, the flicker of understanding, but doubt crept in. Had his apology been genuine, or just another manipulation? She adjusted the bracelet on her wrist, its silver charm cool against her skin, a reminder of her mother's words, "You're stronger than you know." But strength felt fragile now, with Nathan's shadow looming and the guests' curious glances prickling her skin. Amelia clapped her hands, her voice bright but strained. "Time for the last game, diaper relay," she announced, trying to revive the party's energy. Guests laughed, forming teams, but the mood was brittle, the storm's aftermath leaving everyone restless. Lila stayed seated, her focus on her babies, but a guest's voice cut through the chatter. It was Tom, Nathan's college friend, his grin wide and careless. "Hey Lila, you're a pro at this, right? For diapers at once." The room chuckled, but the words landed like a stone, turning curiosity into judgment. Lila's smile tightened, her heart lurching. "We manage," she said, her voice steady but clipped, echoing her response. She felt the room's eyes on her, the weight of their assumptions. Tom leaned closer, his tone teasing but edged. "No dad in the picture though? That's gotta be tough." The question wasn't new, but in this moment, it felt like an attack, a reminder of the life Nathan had painted as incomplete. Lila's fingers tightened on the stroller, her breath shallow. "They have me," she said, her voice low, fierce. "That's enough." Nathan flinched, the words hitting harder than he expected. He'd heard Tom's question, seen Lila's reaction, and felt a surge of anger, not at her but at himself. He'd invited her here to mock her, to rub his new life in her face, and now Tom was doing it for him, exposing the cruelty he'd set in motion. He stepped forward, his voice sharp. "Tom, enough." The room stilled, heads turning. Tom raised his hands, laughing. "Just joking, man. Chill." But Nathan's face was taut, his eyes locked on Lila, who met his gaze with a mix of defiance and pain. The moment broke when Amelia's voice faltered mid-instruction, her hand clutching her side. Oh, she gasped, her face paling. The room's attention shifted, guests murmuring in concern. Nathan rushed to her, his hands gentle but urgent. Amelia, what's wrong? He asked, his voice tight. She forced a smile, but her eyes were wide. Just a cramp, I think. It's fine. But her grip on his arm was tight, and the fear in her eyes was unmistakable. A guest, an older woman with a nurse's calm, stepped forward. Let's get her to sit down. Could be Braxton Hicks, but we should call her doctor. The party dissolved into quiet chaos, guests gathering their things, whispering about the storm and Amelia's health. Lila stood, her heart pounding, torn between leaving and staying. She didn't belong here, not in this crisis, but Amelia's kindness, her blanket, her cookies, her apology had left a mark. She pushed the stroller toward the couch where Amelia sat, her movements instinctive. Do you need anything? Lila asked softly, her voice cutting through the murmur. Amelia looked up, her eyes glistening. Just stay close, please. The request was raw, vulnerable, and Lila nodded, her own fears softening. Nathan watched, his chest tight. Lila's presence, her calm in the face of this new storm, was a mirror to his own inadequacy. He'd wanted to hurt her, but now, seeing her comfort Amelia, he felt small. The bond they'd formed, fragile as it was, shattered under the weight of his guilt. He turned away, his voice low as he spoke to the nurse. I'll call the doctor. But his eyes kept drifting to Lila, to the babies, to the life he'd dismissed. He'd been wrong, and the realization cut deeper than he could bear. Lila felt the shift, the way Nathan's gaze hardened, then withdrew. She wanted to reach out, to hold on to the moment of understanding they'd shared, but Tom's words echoed, and now Amelia's distress added a new layer of guilt. Had her presence caused this? Had her arrival pushed Nathan to a place that stressed Amelia? She knelt by the stroller, brushing a curl from Nora's forehead, her heart heavy. We're okay, she whispered, but the words felt hollow. The room, once a stage for her triumph, now felt like a trap, her babies caught in the crossfire of old wounds. Nathan's voice broke the silence, sharp and raw. You should go, Lila. The words were sudden, a blade in the quiet. Lila's head snapped up, her eyes meeting his. What? She asked, her voice steady but trembling beneath. Nathan's jaw clenched, his hands balled into fists. It's too much. You being here. It's not good for her. He nodded toward Amelia, who looked away, her face flushed with embarrassment or pain. Lila's heart sank, the fragile bond they'd built crumbling. You invited me, she said, her voice low, cutting. You wanted this. I didn't want this, Nathan snapped, his voice louder now, drawing eyes. I didn't know you'd show up with them. He gestured toward the babies, his words clumsy, desperate. Lila stood, her hands shaking but her voice steady. Don't you dare make this about them. They're my world. You don't get to judge that. The room was silent, the guests frozen, the air thick with their history. Amelia reached out, her voice weak. Nate, stop. Please. But Nathan didn't hear her, his eyes locked on Lila, his guilt and anger colliding. Lila felt the weight of it all, the past, the present, the babies in her care. She wanted to stay, to help Amelia, but Nathan's words were a wall, pushing her out. The bond they'd glimpsed was gone, replaced by the same pain he'd caused years ago. She turned to Amelia, her voice soft. I hope you're okay. I'll go. She pushed the stroller toward the door, the drizzle outside a welcome escape from the storm within. The drizzle outside Nathan and Amelia's home had ceased, leaving a slick sheen on the driveway and a heavy silence inside. The guests had trickled out, their goodbyes hurried, casting awkward glances at Lila as she gathered her things. The air smelled of rain-soaked earth and fading vanilla from the candles, a reminder of the party's unraveling. Lila pushed the stroller toward the door, her heart a storm of its own. Nathan's outburst. You go, Lila. This is too much. She'd nodded, her voice steady as she said goodbye to Amelia, who lay on the couch under a blanket, her face pale but grateful. Take care of yourself, Lila had whispered, her hand brushing Amelia's briefly. Now, alone with her babies in the dim entryway, the weight of the day pressed down. Lila buckled Eli and Nora into the stroller, her movements mechanical, her mind racing. Theo fussed in the carrier, his cries a sharp counterpoint to the quiet house. She rocked him gently, her hazel eyes stinging with unshed tears. Nathan's words had shattered the fragile bond they'd built, reducing her to the outsider she'd always been in his eyes. I didn't want this, he'd said, as if her life, her children, were a burden. She wanted to hate him, to drive away and never look back, but the flicker of vulnerability in his apology earlier haunted her. Had it been real? Or just a momentary lapse? She glanced back at the living room where Nathan stood alone now, Amelia dozing under the nurse's watch. His silhouette was tense, shoulders hunched, and for a second she saw the man she'd loved, the one who'd promised forever before blame eroded it all. Outside, the minivan's door slid open with a soft whoosh, the cool evening air brushing her skin. Lila settled the babies inside, their car seats clicking into place like anchors. Ivy cooed, her tiny hand reaching out, and Lila took it, her thumb stroking the soft skin. "We're going home," she whispered, more to herself than the baby. But home felt far away, her resolve cracking. Pride urged her to leave, to protect her heart and her children from Nathan's chaos. Vulnerability whispered something else. That maybe, just maybe, he needed to see her strength one last time. She paused, her hand on the door, the invitation crumpled in her purse. A symbol of his cruelty turned to her triumph. What was the choice? To walk away forever or to reach out, risking more pain? Nathan watched from the window as Lila loaded the minivan, his chest tight with regret. Amelia was stable, the doctor's call confirming it was just stress-induced cramps, but the scare had stripped him bare. He'd lashed out at Lila, blaming her for the disruption, but deep down he knew it was his doing. The invitation, the malice, the unspoken guilt that had festered. He leaned against the frame, the glass cool against his forehead, memories flooding back. Their wedding day, her laugh in the kitchen, the empty nursery they'd painted together. He'd destroyed that, walking away because it was easier than facing his own fears of failure. Now, seeing her with the quadruplets, he envied her, not her children but her wholeness. She'd healed without him, and that terrified him. Amelia stirred on the couch, her voice weak. "She's gone." Nathan nodded, not turning. "Yeah." Amelia sighed, her eyes searching his face. "You pushed her away, Nate." "Why?" He swallowed, his throat dry. "I don't know. I couldn't handle it. Seeing her like that, happy. It made me question everything." Amelia's hand reached for his, her grip soft but firm. "Question us? Or you?" The words hung, a mirror to his soul. Nathan pulled away gently, his mind churning. Pride told him to let Lila go, to cling to the life he'd built with Amelia. But vulnerability, the raw ache of what he'd lost, urged him to follow her, to apologize properly, to bridge the gap before it was too late. He stepped outside, the gravel crunching under his shoes, the air crisp and damp. Lila was in the van, the engine humming to life. He approached, his heart pounding, waving her down. She rolled down the window, her expression guarded, Theo still in her arms. "What do you want, Nathan?" she asked, her voice steady but edged with exhaustion. He stopped a few feet away, hands in his pockets, searching for words. I didn't mean it. What I said. It wasn't about you or them. It was me. I'm scared, Lila. Scared that I messed up the best thing I had." The confession spilled out, raw and unfiltered, his eyes pleading. Lila's breath caught, her fingers tightening on the steering wheel. She wanted to drive away, to choose the safety of solitude, but his words pierced the armor she'd built. "You did mess it up," she said softly, her voice trembling. "You broke me, Nathan. But I fixed myself. Without you." He nodded, stepping closer, his voice low. "I see that now. And I'm proud of you. More than you know." The praise was unexpected, a balm to old wounds, but it came with a cost, stirring feelings she'd buried. Love at last? Or just echoes? She looked at her babies, their faces lit by the dashboard glow, and felt the pull of two worlds, the one she'd created alone and the possibility of forgiveness. The tension stretched, the engines hummed the only sound. Nathan's phone buzzed. Amelia probably, but he ignored it. "Can we talk? Really talk? Not here, not now, but sometime." Lila hesitated, her mind a whirlwind. Pride screamed no, vulnerability whispered yes. She thought of the theme that had guided her life. Unexpected love, finding it in the ruins. "Maybe," she said finally, her voice quiet but resolute. "But on my terms. For me, not for you." Nathan's relief was palpable, a nod of acceptance. "Fair enough." She rolled up the window, her heart racing, and drove away, the taillights fading into the night. Alone in the driveway, Nathan stood, the choice made. He'd reached out, vulnerability winning over pride. Inside, Amelia waited, her own decisions looming. For Lila, the drive home was tense, internal debate raging. Had she chosen right? The baby's soft snores filled the van, a reminder of her strength. She'd reached a crossroads, opting for truth over avoidance, setting the stage for transformation. The night air was crisp, laced with the earthy scent of rain-soaked grass as Lila drove her minivan through the quiet streets, away from Nathan and Amelia's home. The headlights cast a soft glow, illuminating the road ahead, while inside Eli, Nora, Theo and Ivy slept in their car seats, their gentle breaths a soothing rhythm. Lila's purse held the crumpled baby shower invitation, its pastel balloons and storks no longer a symbol of Nathan's cruelty but a testament to her triumph. His voice lingered in her mind, "I'm proud of you. More than you know," mingling with the memory of her own strength, standing tall with her quadruplets in a room meant to break her. She'd entered that house expecting pain but was leaving transformed, carrying a victory not over Nathan, but over the doubts that once defined her. At the house, Nathan stood alone in the driveway, the gravel damp beneath his shoes, the night's chill seeping through his jacket. The red glow of Lila's taillights had faded, but her presence clung to him, heavy and undeniable. Amelia rested inside, safe after a frightening moment, her words echoing, "Question us? Or you?" The baby shower, once his stage to flaunt a perfect life, had crumbled, exposing his pride, his guilt, his flaws. He'd reached out to Lila, choosing vulnerability, but now faced a final choice: to cling to the man he'd been or to embrace a future with Amelia, honest and whole. Lila's drive was slow, the road slick under the streetlight's glow. Her hands gripped the wheel, the silver bracelet on her wrist catching the light. A gift from her mother, a reminder of her words, "You're stronger than you know." She'd left the door open for Nathan to talk on her terms, but now the weight of that decision settled. Could she forgive him, not for his sake but for hers? The theme of unexpected love pulsed within her. Not for Nathan but for herself, forged through years of heartbreak and the miracle of her children. She glanced in the rearview mirror, the silhouettes of her babies grounding her. They were her redemption, proof she was enough. Nathan re-entered the house, the living room dim, balloons sagging, the gift table cluttered with unopened packages. Amelia sat up on the couch, her face pale but soft, her eyes searching his. "You okay, Nate?" she asked, her voice gentle but heavy with concern. He sat beside her, taking her hand, its warmth a quiet anchor. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice raw. "Seeing Lila, her kids, it made me see myself. The mistakes I made." Amelia's brow furrowed, but she squeezed his hand, waiting. He exhaled, the truth spilling out. "I hurt her, Amelia. I blamed her for things that weren't her fault. I've been running from that for years." Amelia's eyes shimmered, but her voice held steady. "You're not that man anymore, Nate. You don't have to be." Her words were a beacon, guiding him toward the life they were building. Nathan nodded, his throat tight. "I want to be better. For you, for our baby. For me." He paused, his gaze landing on a small gift box. A simple onesie from Lila, a gesture of grace he hadn't earned. He retrieved it, handing it to Amelia. "She didn't have to come," he said softly. "But she did. And she's incredible." Amelia's lips curved, a sad but understanding smile as she opened the box, her fingers tracing the soft fabric. Lila reached her apartment, the door creaking as she carried her babies inside, one by one settling them in their cribs. The living room was a warm chaos of toys and bottles, a home shaped by love. She sank onto the couch, the bracelet glinting under the lamplight, and let herself breathe. The day had been a tempest. Nathan's cruelty, the guest's scrutiny, Amelia's unexpected kindness, the fleeting connection with Nathan, but she'd emerged whole. Her phone buzzed, a text from her sister Clara. "You okay? How'd it go?" Lila smiled, typing back, "I faced it. And I'm stronger for it." She set the phone down, her heart lighter, the weight of old wounds lifting. Days later, Nathan sat at a cafe, its windows bright with morning sun, the air rich with coffee and fresh pastries. He texted Lila, asking to meet, honoring her terms. She arrived alone, her babies with Clara, wearing the same navy dress, her bracelet catching the light. Her hazel eyes were steady, open but guarded as she sat across from him. "You wanted to talk," she said, her voice calm but firm. Nathan nodded, his hands wrapped around a mug, its warmth steadying him. I needed to say it right, he said, his voice low. I'm sorry, Lila. For blaming you. For leaving. For the invitation. All of it. The words were a reckoning heavy with truth. Lila listened, her heart a tangle of ache and relief. I needed to hear that, she said softly, her voice steady. But I don't need you to fix it. I fixed myself. She paused, her eyes softening, a flicker of peace. I forgive you, Nathan. Not because you deserve it, but because I deserve to move on. The words echoed her arrival at the baby shower, when she'd walked in with her quadruplets, claiming her truth against his mockery. Nathan's eyes glistened, a weight lifting. Thank you, he whispered, his voice breaking. I'm trying to be better. For Amelia, for our kid. Lila nodded, a small smile breaking through. Then do it. Be better. They parted not as lovers but as two people transformed by truth. Nathan returned to Amelia, his heart open, ready to build their future without the shadow of guilt. Lila went home to her babies, their laughter filling the apartment, a testament to the love she'd found within herself. The invitation, once a weapon, had become a turning point, leading them both to redemption. Lila tucked the bracelet under her sleeve, its charm a quiet echo of her strength, and kissed Ivy's forehead. We're home, she whispered, the words a vow to her new life. Have you ever found closure by choosing forgiveness or letting go of past pain? Share in the comments how it changed your life.
Wow, what an incredible story. Thank you so much for watching till the very end. Your time and support truly mean everything to me. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next one. We've got so many more powerful stories coming your way. See you in the next video.